Okay, recording. All right, this is FIFA member France World Cup history, episode 5. We're going to cover the first 3 World Cups at the turn of this century. So that's the 2002 in South Korea and Japan, 2006 in Germany, and 2010 in South Africa. All right, I hope you enjoy. So let's move on to the World Cups in this century, the 21st century. So, yeah, the first World Cup in this millennium was the 2002 World Cup in South Korea and Japan. France would be the very last team to win a World Cup and qualify for the next World Cup automatically. Since 2006 World Cup, every nation who has won the World Cup would still have to qualify for the following World Cup. So, who won the World Cup in 2002? That was Brazil. They had to qualify for the next World Cup in 2006. Now, speaking of 2002, the 2002 World Cup in South Korea and Japan was the very first World Cup to be held in Asia. It's also the first World Cup to be hosted by 2 nations. Currently, it's the only World Cup to be hosted by 2 nations. For the next 2 World Cups in 2026 and in 2030, they'll be hosted by multiple nations. So, France, as the champions, they automatically qualified for the World Cup. France were in Group A. The other nations in their group was Denmark, Senegal, and Uruguay. So this is the second time in a row that Denmark was in France's group. All of Group A's matches took place in South Korea. France would start off the 2002 World campaign. A quick note, after 2002, every World Cup started off with the host nation kicking off. So as champions, France started the World Cup campaign. The previous World Cup to this in 1998, Brazil were champions in the 1994 World Cup, so they started it off. France played Senegal in the opening game and they lost 1-0 thanks to a goal from Papa Bouya Diop. That was a surprise win for Senegal, beating the champions at the time, the holders, France. They played in Seoul World Cup Stadium. Weren't a good start. Then France went on to play Uruguay. That game ended 0-0. And then finally, Denmark played France and Denmark beat France 2-0, a return from the 1998 World Cup where France did beat Denmark. This time Denmark turned it around, beating France 2-0. Ramadel was one of the scorers and Thomason finished off the scoring for Denmark, which knocked France out of that tournament. France shockingly got knocked out of the 2002 World Cup. It wasn't the first time that a nation that has won the World Cup got knocked out of the group stage. Brazil done that in 1966 as the champions from the 1962 World Cup. However, Brazil did win at least one of their games. I have mentioned that there's a few other nations after France where a champion team would get, the World Cup holders would get knocked out of the group stage. That said, all of those nations was able to at least score once, even though they may have drew their games. Unlike France in this World Cup, where the 1 point they got was against Uruguay, but they failed to score. So as of now, France has the worst performance for a defending champion. Okay, let's move on to the 2006 World Cup. starting with the qualifiers. Now, if France did win in 2002, if they did, retain the World Cup, then they would have still had to have qualified, as mentioned. France was put in a group of six. They were in group four of the UEFA qualifying rounds for the 2006 World Cup. Nations in their group was Switzerland, Israel, Republic of Ireland, Cyprus, and the Faroe Islands. Again, more nations were added into UEFA and became FIFA members. So there were more nations in groups. So some groups had seven nations rather than six. To qualify for the World Cup in 2006 in the UEFA zone, you would need to top your group. Another way of qualifying is being second in your group, but the best runner-up. Groups of seven was excluded from the rankings of the best runner-ups, and any nation that finishes second in any of the groups of seven will automatically go through to the playoffs. While in groups of six, the best two runners up will qualify for the World Cup automatically. France needed to top their group to make sure that they would qualify, and they did. They lost none of their games, 5 wins and 5 draws. France started off their 2006 qualifying campaign. They drew their first game against Israel. That was a 0-0 draw. But went on to beat in the Faroe Islands 2-0. They drew to the Republic of Ireland 0-0 in the next game. But this time they bounced back and they beat Cyprus 2-0. Goals from Wiltor and Henry. Well, they had back-to-back draws. Again, they drew Switzerland 0-0. They drew to, and Israel 1-0. But they beat Faroe 3-0. And then they beat the Republic of Ireland 1-0. Their last two games, they had another draw with Switzerland, but they finished their campaign off beating Cyprus 4-0, which put them top of their table, 2 points ahead of Switzerland, who was second. Switzerland did go on to qualify for that World Cup as well as France. So that's how France qualified for the 2006 World Cup, where they played a lot better than they did in 2002, where they reached the final. So we're going to look how France was able to reach the final in 2006. France was put in Group G. They met Switzerland again, who they qualified with. They met one of the two co-hosts of the World Cup in 2002, and that was South Korea. And Togo, who made their very first World Cup appearance. The 2006 World Cup was in Germany, and France kicked off their campaign against Switzerland, both nations drawing 0-0. Third time these two played each other, and the third time they drew. France's next game was against South Korea, where they were leading in the 9th minute from a goal from Thierry Henry. But late on in the 81st minute, Jason Park for South Korea equalised. All to play for in the last match, France played Togo while Switzerland played South Korea. France was able to beat Togo 2-0, goals from Vieira and Henry ensured that France would at least get second place. Switzerland ended up beating South Korea, so that meant Switzerland and France advanced to the round of 16. This time, Switzerland finished above France. France played Spain in the round of 16. Villa for Spain had a 28th minute penalty, but Ribery equalising in the 41st minute, just before the first half. I'm sorry, just before the second half. Then late on, Vieira in the 83rd minute scored, making it 2-1 to France. And then Zidane finished off the scoring. France beat Spain 3-1, and they went through to the quarterfinals. In the quarterfinals, a bit of a repeat from the 1998 World Cup final. France played Brazil. A goal from Thierry Henry in the 57th minute means France went through, beat Brazil, and Brazil again were the champions, just like back in '98 where Brazil were the champions. For after winning the '94 World Cup, France again beats Brazil, and this time though it was in the quarterfinals, so France still had a lot more to do. France go on to play Portugal in the semi-finals. Take note, this was only the second time that Portugal has reached the semi-finals. The other time was in 1966. France was able to beat Portugal 1-0. A penalty from Zidane secured France's place in the final. So Italy, France 2006 World Cup final, played in the Olympia Stadium, Berlin. Zidane opened up the scoring with a penalty in the 7th minute. Materazzi, who gave away the penalty, managed to equalise for Italy in the 19th minute, making it 1-1. The game then went on to extra time. Now, during extra time, the two goal scorers, Zidane and Materazzi, meet. This time, Zidane headbutts Materazzi. He got sent off. That happened very late in the second half of extra time. The game ended 1-1 and went to penalties. This would be the second time that the World Cup finals would be decided on penalties. The very first time was between Italy and Brazil, where Brazil went on to win in that final. That was the 1994 World Cup final. This time around, it was different. Italy went on to winning this penalty shootout. It ended 5-3. Trezeguet for France was the only player to miss a penalty in the 5-3 penalty shootout. Grosso ensured that Italy would win that final by scoring the winning penalty. So, though France had a much better showing at the 2006 World Cup than they did in the 2002, still more pain for them, falling at the final hurdle. The 2006 World Cup was the last time that Italy has won the World Cup. This final meant that they've won it 4 times, making them equalled second with Germany. At that time in 2006, though, they were second by themselves, only 1 World Cup behind Brazil, who are on 5. Italy hasn't reached the final since. Okay, let's move on to the next World Cup, and that was the World Cup in 2010, hosted by South Africa. The very first time that the World Cup would be hosted in Africa, and at this point in time, the only time it was hosted in this region. Okay, so this one's an interesting one. So, Group 7 of the UEFA World Cup qualifying for the 2010 World Cup, France was in that group. They were in the same group as Serbia, Austria, Lithuania, Romania, and they met the Faroe Islands for the second time in a row. France started off the campaign poorly by losing to Austria 3-1, though they did bounce back at home where they beat Serbia 2-1. Drew their next game with Romania 2-2, but beat Lithuania 1-0 twice, home and away. Both times Ribery scored. And they were able to beat Faroe Islands again, beating them 1-0. They had another draw with Romania, 1-1 draw. And then drew to Serbia 1-0 as well. Henry scored in both of those games. But they won their final two games of the campaign, beating Faroe Islands 5-0. Gignac scored 2 goals. Gallas and Nelka Benzema also scored for France. And they were able to beat Austria, returned their 3-1 defeat by beating Austria 3-1. Benzema scored again, so did Gignac. And Henry scored a penalty as well in that match. Janka scored for Austria in that game. He did score against France in the opener as well. France ended up finishing second, different from the 2006 UEFA World Cup qualifying campaign. There were 8 groups of 6 and 1 group of 5. If you were in that group of 5, you needed to top the group to qualify. If you were in all the other groups of 6, first place qualified for the World Cup. Second, you were through to the playoff phase. France finished second, so they advanced to the playoffs. To try and ensure that the better teams do qualify for the World Cup, they put teams in seeded and unseeded positions. France was one of the seeded teams, so they were going to play one of the unseeded teams. Those unseeded teams were Ukraine, Republic of Ireland, Bosnia and Herzegovina, finally Slovenia. France played the Republic of Ireland. They drew against them. Okay, all the playoff teams will play home and away. In the first leg, France was away, Republic of Ireland. Cook Park in Dublin, the game was played. France was able to beat the Republic of Ireland 1-0, and Nelka scored in the 68th minute. Now, in the second leg, that's where something interesting happened. So, the Republic of Ireland was able to make the game 1-1 on aggregate, where Robbie Keane scored in the 33rd minute. The game was then taken to extra time. So, on aggregate, it was 1-1 and took the game to extra time. Gallas scored for France, taking France to the 2010 World Cup. Thierry Henry did stop the ball from going out of play by using his hand before passing it to Gallas. But because of this, France was able to qualify for another World Cup. The Republic of Ireland haven't come close since 2010 to qualify for the World Cup. So that's how France did qualify for the 2010 World Cup. Let's see how they performed. And honestly, it was similar to their 2002 performance. Only difference is that they were able to score this time. So France were put. put in the same group as the host nation, South Africa. They also joined Uruguay once again, similar to the 2002 World Cup, where they put in the same group, and Mexico, where they've met Mexico quite a few times in the past. They were put in that group. France started off their campaign with a 0-0 draw in the Cape Town Stadium in Cape Town against Uruguay. And they kind of continued this trend where they reached the final of a World Cup. And then the next World Cup, they failed to score a goal. They played Mexico and they lost 2-0 to Mexico. And finally, what finished their poor World Cup campaign, they lost to the host nation, South Africa, losing 2-1. And that knocked out France from the 2010 World Cup. They finished bottom of their group with only 1 point, similar to the 2002 World Cup.
Okay, that was episode 5 on FIFA members France World Cup history. We covered the 2002, 2006, and the 2010 World Cups. So the first 3 World Cups of this century. The next episode, I will cover the 2014, 18, and 2022 World Cup and how France performed in all 3 of those World Cups. And that would be the last episode. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I appreciate it. And bye.